fellas, last night was UFC Abu Dhabi Sandhagen versus Nurmagomedov. It was overall a really good fight night throughout the card, but I'm going to be going through the 5 best moments throughout the card, the 5 moments that really made the card what it was, and then the 5 worst moments throughout the card, the 5 things that definitely brought this card down a notch. So, yeah, we're going to be going through the 5 best and worst moments for that fight night that just went down, but like I said, overall, it was a really good fight night. There's just a lot of good talking points to come from this card, but we'll start off with the negative. We'll start off with the 5 worst moments to come from UFC Abu Dhabi. And at number 5, I have gone with the lack of finishes on this card. Now, I said the exact same thing last week for UFC 304. There's going to be something in the air in the UFC ever since the new gloves have come into the UFC. I don't know if it's the gloves or the matchmaking or what it is, but for the past couple of UFC cards, it feels like ever since UFC 300, there has just been a massive lack of finishes in the UFC. There was only 4 finishes on this entire card. I think there was 13 fights, 4 finishes, and that's not like an absurd amount. I know UFC 302 was worse, but there was so many fights in this card that I expected to get finishes. For only 4 of them to go, to get a finish. Up until the fight with Muhammad Yahya and Kyle Fernandez, there was literally not even a single finish on the card. So I feel like the lack of finishes definitely brought this card down. I think there could have been a lot more finishes on this card. The fact that there was only 4, and with one of them being Tony Ferguson and Michael Chiesa, definitely brought this card down a notch. And there were just so many fights that I was so confident was going to end. Like, there were so many fights you could look at and say, yeah, there's no way this is going the distance. And they went the distance. So at number 5, I'm going to go with the lack of finishes on UFC Abu Dhabi. Only 4 finishes. Again, it's not that bad. I know there's been worse, but I swear back a few years ago, only a couple of years ago, it was getting to the point where there was genuinely more finishes on the card than decisions. And now it feels like these days, 9 decisions on this card with only 4 coming by stoppage. I want to know what Dana said. Well, Dana was thinking about this after the card, because we know what he said about UFC 304. I can only imagine what he's thinking about this card. So the lack of finishes on UFC Abu Dhabi, in my opinion, definitely brought it down. There was just a lot of fights in this card I was confident were going to end in a finish, and they didn't. So that's going to have to bring it down a notch. At number 4, I'm going to go with Corey Sandhagen not getting his title shot. This has nothing to do with me being against Nurmagomedov. I'm going to say this in the 5 best moments because I'm actually excited to see Nurmagomedov progress. But I feel bad for Corey Sandhagen, man, because I still legitimately think he is one of the best bantamweights in the world. A part of me was actually thinking that the winner of this fight was going to become, the champion of the world and beat the winner of O'Malley Merab because of how high level this fight was. But I feel like you've got to be bummed out if you're Corey Sandhagen. I don't understand how Marlon Vera, the dude with a record of 23-10, and coming into the fight with Sean O'Malley, he had already lost to Corey Sandhagen. He'd lost to Song Yadong. He'd lost to Jose Aldo, and his best win was Dominic Cruz, who, by the way, hasn't fought since. And he got a title shot from that. And then he goes out there, loses to Sean O'Malley, and loses to Davison Figueiredo. And then you've got Corey Sandhagen, who has just been on fire, demolished Marlon Vera, who fought for a belt, KO'd Song Yadong. Well, I guess it was an injury, but beat Song Yadong, beat Rob Font, and then his only losses, apart from the Sterling one, was a robbery over TJ Dillashaw and the PT Yan fight, and he was one of the most well-rounded dudes in the division, and then he had to fight undefeated Nurmagomedov, man. I feel bad for Corey Sandhagen. I still think he's one of the best in the world. I still think he's top 3, top 4 best in the world right now in the bantamweight division. He's so well-rounded. He's super good on the feet. His takedown defense might be the best in the division, and I just feel bad for this dude, man, because he didn't have to fight down. He could have easily just rejected that fight with Nurmagomedov and got a much easier matchup to get, a fight for the belt. He could have faced like Figueiredo or a rematch with PT Yan, which is a lot more favourable to him than Nurmagomedov. And the fact that he took the test and just about fell short, you've got to feel for Corey Sandhagen, man. Again, I've got nothing against Nurmagomedov, but I feel bad for Sandhagen. If you're Sandhagen, man, what a BMF though for taking that fight with Nurmagomedov when he didn't have to. But yeah, you got to feel bad for him in that fight. And number 3, the 3rd worst moment to come from UFC Abu Dhabi, is Sharapati Magomedov calling out Nick Diaz in his post-fight interview. Now, obviously, he had just beaten Makal, which is, I don't know if it was his best win. I still think his UFC debut against Silva was better, but he had a really good win over Makal. He was in the co-main event of an Abu Dhabi card. He got the Octagon interview with DC, and he got asked, who do you want to fight next? Is there a certain name you want to fight next? And the dude calls out Nick Diaz. I mean, first of all, that's never going to happen. He's going to be rescheduled against Vicente Luque. The UFC would never make that fight. In fact, the UFC will probably make that fight considering, the fights that they're doing recently. Seems like the UFC just want the cash now. But, it's an extremely unrealistic matchup. And, bro, why are you calling out Nick Diaz? There's so many middleweight prospects you could have called out. You could have even, reached and called for maybe a ranked fighter like every other middleweight is doing. But Nick Diaz, the dude who got absolutely mutilated by Robbie Lawler a few years ago and hasn't won a fight in years. This is the guy you're calling out. I don't know what he was expecting with that call-out. It's almost as bad as Buckley calling out McGregor. Like, it wouldn't be a competitive fight. It wouldn't be a fight that's going to necessarily make anyone impressed with you or anything like that. It was just a terrible call-out. You could have called anyone out. You could have called out Bo Nickel. You could have called out so many matchups in the middleweight division. Call out Gregory Rodriguez. Call out Bruno Ferreira. Call out Roman Kopylov. You called out Nick Diaz, a fight that you know is not going to happen as well. He's going to be rescheduled against Luque as well. So, a complete wasted call-out from Nurmagomedov. Didn't look good at all. Nobody wants to see that fight. It's almost as bad as Buckley calling out Conor McGregor. And for me, that's going to go in the third worst moment. You just beat McCall and in the co-main event of an Abu Dhabi card, and you had the world watching. You could have called anyone out, and you called out Nick bloody Diaz. So, that's the third worst moment coming from this card. A complete wasted call-out from Nurmagomedov. At number 2, this is going to go very similar to the original point, which was a lack of finishes, but it's going to be a bit more in depth. And it was that I was expecting a bit more from some fights on this card. There was a lot of fights on this card, like I said, that I didn't think were going to go for the distance. And even if they were to go for a distance, there was just a lot of fights I thought was going to perform a lot better. I thought Nurmagomedov was going to go out there and absolutely obliterate McCall, which wasn't the case. It was actually a much closer fight than I thought. I thought Marlon Vera versus Figueiredo was going to be way better. I'm going to be for real. That was one of the fights I was like, there's no way this is a boring fight. And it wasn't a boring fight, right? It wasn't boring. They both had their moments. They both looked good. They both look really good on the feet. Figueiredo mixed it up really well, but I was just expecting a bit more, man. I thought it was going to be a bit more, a bit more of a barn burner. I thought they were going to be going at it a little bit more, and one that really kind of didn't. Again, it wasn't a bad fight, but Alvarez versus Elvis Brenner, I was expecting a little bit more from that as well. You've got two guys, and I know Alvarez got the finish in the third, but you've got two guys who practically are allergic to going the distance. Two guys that bring it every single time. Two guys that are in a war in every single fight. It felt like up until the finish, there was just not a lot going on. I mean, it was Alvarez kind of just being extremely patient, Elvis Brenner trying to feint, and then every now and then Alvarez would go for a high kick, land the high kick, and then Elvis Brenner would try and return with another shot. And that was pretty much the entire fight, up until Alvarez got his finish and a couple submission attempts in the first and the second round. And I just expected a bit more from a lot of fights on this card. A lot of the fights didn't necessarily disappoint. Again, I'm not saying the fights were bad. I was just expecting a lot more from some of the fights that I was expecting that were going to be bangers. So that, in my opinion, is the second worst. A few matchups that I was just expecting a little bit more from. And then number 1, the worst moment to come from UFC Abu Dhabi. You already know what it is. It's Tony Ferguson now progressing onto an 8-fight losing streak. Now, I know everyone's kind of making jokes about it. CSO, the first guy to get the longest consecutive losses in the UFC with 8. The first guy to half retire in the UFC, such a Tony Ferguson thing to do. But it's kind of sad, man. This dude has kind of just sacrificed his legacy in his past 8 fights. He went from a 12-fight winning streak to an 8-fight losing streak, and it feels like every single time he fights, we say retire, and he doesn't. And it wasn't even, like I said in my matchmaking video, it's not even like Ferguson's looking good and he's just falling short. He doesn't look good at all. And I just want him to retire before it's too late, man. I'm sick of it. I've gone past the point where I'm like, oh, maybe this is going to be the one where Ferguson gets it, guys. This is a winnable fight for Ferguson. Maybe this is going to be one where he wins. And it just never is. So Tony Ferguson progressing onto an 8-fight losing streak for me has to be the worst moment to come from this card. It's just depressing every single time we watch Tony Ferguson fight. It's almost as if every single time he gets booked, it's almost as if you can guarantee there's going to be some form of disappointment. And this was his easiest fight in his 8-fight run, and he got submitted in the first. So that's the worst moment in my opinion, watching Ferguson lose again, because every single time he fights, man, there's a glimpse of hope in me that Ferguson's going to find a way to pull it off, and he never does. So I just want him to retire before it's too late, because I don't want to witness this dude going to a 9-fight losing streak. So that was the worst moment to come from UFC Abu Dhabi in my opinion. But now we'll talk about the best. We'll be a bit more positive. At number 5 of the 5th best moment to come from UFC Abu Dhabi is that Mackenzie Dern versus Lupita Godinez was a great fight. I know everyone's has a little bit of a bitter taste in their mouth when it comes to women MMA fights on main cards of pay-per-views or fight nights, especially fight nights of this caliber. But it was a really, really good fight, and I wasn't really expecting this to be a really good fight. I thought it was going to be a bit messy on the feet. Mackenzie Dern looking really sloppy, unorthodox on the feet and just shooting for takedowns every now and then. And I was expecting it to go to a decision, but I didn't expect it to be the best fight. But this was a really, really good fight on the main card. Great way to, well, it didn't open up the main card, but just a really good fight on the main card. Mackenzie Dern's striking looked a lot more sharp. It was a very high-paced, high-output fight. Mackenzie Dern looked really good on the feet. Lupita Godinez was able to return every now and then. Had the perfect mix of striking and grappling, and it wasn't even like the grappling exchanges were boring, because it was either Mackenzie Dern faking a submission, then if she didn't get it, she immediately went back to the feet, or she would just demolish Godinez with ground and pound. It was overall a really fun fight. Perfect mix of striking and grappling. It was a high-paced fight for 3 rounds straight, and it was definitely one of the better fights on the main card. So the fact that Mackenzie Dern and Lupita Godinez kept the reputation up for women MMA, didn't disappoint on the card. It was a really good fight, and I think this is a reoccurring theme that I'm noticing in Mackenzie Dern fights. She's actually quite a fun fighter. It's very hard you have Mackenzie Dern fights that aren't interesting, even if it's her getting her ass whooped, like it was against her when she fought Andrade and when she fought Amanda Lemos. It's still fun to see. So Mackenzie Dern, Lupita Godinez was actually a really fun fight on the main card. The 4th best moment to come from UFC Abu Dhabi, I've gone with Azamat Mirzakhanov's win, and more broad, the light heavyweight division is starting to become interesting. The light heavyweight division has always been one of the most uncompetitive divisions in the UFC, but I feel like in these past couple of cards, it's got to the point where the division's really becoming quite interesting. We've got obviously Carlos Ulberg, who's on a massive run. He's ranked number 11th, I think, or maybe 10th. And now we've got Azamat Mirzakhanov, who's came back after a year. I thought, he's back after a year. He's going to beat Menifield, but it's going to be a bit of a bad performance. Dude, he destroyed Alonzo Menifield. He just absolutely picked him apart. He just destroyed him with the boxing, got the finish over Alonzo Menifield, and he looked great out there. And I think he's going to be a real problem in the light heavyweight division. So now that we're seeing these up-and-coming guys, like not Alonzo Menifield, like Azamat Mirzakhanov and Carlos Ulberg in the light heavyweight division. I'm actually interested to see the future of this division, because obviously we've got Pereira as champion, and he's already cleared out the top 5 of the division. He beat Jan Blachowicz, he beat, what's his name, Jamal Hill, beat Yuri Prochazka, Ankalaev's now going to be facing Rakic. So now that we're having more guys like Carlos Ulberg into the mix, Khalil Roundtree and Azamat Mirzakhanov, it's going to be interesting. And Mirzakhanov got a really good finish. One of the few finishes on this card, looked really good out there. He's got really dangerous boxing, and he's going to be a really tough guy to beat in this division, because he's got such like a, he's just such a dangerous guy for everyone in the division. He's not easy to take down. He's got very fast hands as well for the light heavyweight division, and he's powerful, and he's a great boxer. So Mirzakhanov got a great win, and more importantly, the light heavyweight division is finally becoming quite interesting with the contenders or the prospects and contenders that we've got up and coming in this division. At number 3, the 3rd best moment to come from this card was that Mikhail versus Shavkat Magomedov was actually really good. Now, I did expect Shavkat Magomedov to put up a better performance than he did. I thought he was going to be a lot more dominant, but I'm not going to sit here and complain about the fight necessarily, because Mikhail, he did really well in that fight, and I thought this was a really good fight. Shavkat Magomedov looks really beatable. He really does. He doesn't look completely unbeatable. He's not like an undefeated prospect that everyone thinks is going to be a future champion, but it was a really fun fight. In that first round, Mikhail was landing some really good shots against the cage, against Shavkat Magomedov, and he mixed it up with his grappling really well. But Shavkat Magomedov was doing really well, too. He was landing those really good leg kicks, those body kicks. His boxing was really crisp as well. He had a very high output pace to Shavkat Magomedov, as he does in all of his fights. He never gives you any time to breathe. When you think one's coming up top, he just destroys you with a leg kick. And it was a really good fight. Mikhail was walking forward. He was bringing a fight, like I said, mixing it up with the grappling as well at times. And in that first round, like I said, he was doing really good. He was landing some really good shots on Shavkat Magomedov. And overall, for a co-main event, even though it didn't get the stoppage, which is what I was hoping, it was still a really good fight, and there was no complaints that I could really make. Again, I was expecting a bit more from Shavkat, but it was a good fight. I'm not going to complain. Magomedov, Mikhail, really good co-main event, and I think this is what we're going to have to expect from Shavkat Magomedov. I don't think we're going to have to see this dude go on a title run. I don't think we're ever going to see this dude, go on an absolute title tear. But I think Shavkat Magomedov is going to be one of these dudes in the division. But if you match him up correctly against fun fighters, he's just going to put on banger after banger, because he's had 3 fights in the UFC, and I guess apart from his fight with Tricoli, which was a bit back and forth, he hasn't really had any boring fights. So Shavkat Magomedov, Mikhail, really fun fight for the co-main event. And at number 2, the second best moment to come from this card was that Umar Nurmagomedov versus Corey Sandhagen has to be one of the highest level fights I have seen in MMA in so long. This kind of reminded me of Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski. You've got a striker in Corey Sandhagen with elite takedown defense who's got really good striking, and you've got the grappler whose striking is improved as well in Nurmagomedov. This was one of the highest level fights I've seen, and that's why when I was watching this, like I said before, I was thinking that the winner of this fight could definitely go on to become the champion, and I think they've got a lot of potential to do so. It was so high level. Corey Sandhagen's takedown defense in this fight was impeccable. Like, it genuinely was. He's so good when defending takedowns. Nurmagomedov shot multiple times throughout every round, and there was only a few times when he got the takedown, and even when he got the takedown, Sandhagen would get straight back up or do enough intelligent defending to get out of any tricky situation. So Sandhagen's takedown defense was really good. Nurmagomedov impressed me a lot on the feet as well. He was landing some really good shots on the feet. The problem with Sandhagen was I think his training camp was purely focused on defending takedowns and nothing else, which allowed Nurmagomedov to get going on the feet. But Nurmagomedov really impressed me on the feet, and that is why if he was to ever face a guy like Merab, I would favour him, because landing shots like that against Corey Sandhagen Sandhagen, one of the most decorated strikers in this division, is really impressive from Umar Nurmagomedov. So, Umar Nurmagomedov, Corey Sandhagen, one of the highest level fights you're ever going to see in MMA. And we talk about the bantamweight division being one of the most competitive in the UFC, and those guys really showed that. It's going to be hard to top, have a more competitive fight. And it's always fun seeing barn burners with guys like Michael Chandler, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, those type of guys. But every now and then, you just want to tune into a high-level fight, like we saw with Volkan Islam, and like we just saw last night with Umar Nurmagomedov and Corey Sandhagen. So it was extremely high level, and that is the second best moment to come from this card. And the number one best moment to come from this card is that the bantamweight title picture is so fun. Last week, when I talked about UFC 304, I was complaining about the fact that the welterweight title picture is going to be boring. It's the complete opposite with the bantamweight title picture. I cannot wait for the next couple of fights in the bantamweight division. I can't wait for Sean O'Malley versus Merab, wrestler versus grappler, dominating grappler versus, relentless grappler versus absolutely dangerous striker. I think that's going to be an absolute banger. And then the winner of that facing Umar Nurmagomedov. It's either Corey Sandhagen faces an undefeated relentless grappler with the last name of Nurmagomedov, who's just taking care of Sandhagen against the best striker in the division, or it's going to be Merab versus Nurmagomedov, the two best grapplers at the division going at it. I can't wait for what we see in the future of the title picture. And it's not only that as well, it's not only those guys. Davison Figueiredo's in the mix as well. Former flyweight champion on a 3-fight winning streak in the bantamweight division. Him versus somebody like Pete Yan's going to be a banger. Jose Aldo Mario Bautista as well. The winner of that's going to get pushed straight back in the title picture. The bantamweight title picture is probably the funnest in the division right now. All the fights, there's no way these fights are boring. They're either going to be absolute bangers and barn burners, or they're going to be high level. There's just so many fun fights right now in the bantamweight division title picture between guys like O'Malley, Nurmagomedov, like I said, Pete Yan, Davison Figueiredo, and even Sandhagen. I know he lost, but he's still in the mix, and obviously Merab as well. And I just can't wait to see what plays out in the next 12 months in the title picture. It could be Sean O'Malley, he's the champion. It could be Merab. It could be Nurmagomedov. It could be anyone, and that's what makes this title picture so interesting. So the title picture of the bantamweight division is so fun to see now, and that is what I think really made this moment, or really made this card, what it was, because the title picture in the bantamweight division is now going to be super interesting. But that, in my opinion, is the 5 best and worst moments to come from UFC Abu Dhabi. Let me know your thoughts on this list, if I should have included anything else, and if you agree or disagree with this list. But that is my list. Thank you for watching.